My parents always favored my sister, the so-called golden child, and supported her. I am a 20-year-old woman, and my sister Mia has always been loved by our parents. She is just 10 months younger than me, and we attended the same school, so we were always competing with each other. We were in the same grade, and I was always at the top. I have surpassed her academically and in other areas, and I have been superior in every competition. I have consistently maintained excellent grades and planned to study data science at California Institute of Technology. On the other hand, my sister was deeply interested in biology and made significant achievements in the field of microbiology, though mainly theoretical with few practical outcomes. Despite being a diligent scholar, my parents refused to pay for my college tuition. In my senior year of high school, after discussing my prospects of attending California Institute of Technology with my parents, they agreed to pay my tuition. My father has been managing a company inherited from my grandfather since childhood, and our family has been wealthy from the start. Nevertheless, my parents always felt uneasy when using their own funds. During his college years, my father was told by my grandfather to work and pay off his debts before inheriting the company. I worried that my father might make similar demands on me, but my parents always reassured me with promises. When the time comes, they will ensure I can attend the university I want without worrying about tuition fees until the last few days. When I was in my senior year, college applications had already started, and my parents had promised to pay the full amount for the university if I got accepted into California Institute of Technology. Over the past 4 years, I received an acceptance letter from California Institute of Technology, but when Mia failed to get into her desired university, my parents changed their minds, decided not to pay for my tuition, and arranged for both of us to attend a mediocre university so Mia wouldn't blame herself. To be fair, she was aiming for Cornell University. It was an unreasonable choice, because her grades clearly did not reach that level. Frankly, she was always an average and unremarkable student. That's not necessarily bad, but she did not strive to progress, and such high hopes only invited failure. And, predictably, it happened. Therefore, when she failed to get into Cornell University and had to settle for another university, my parents asked me to take care of her. Regardless of what she faced, I had no reason to accept that. I proceeded to go to the university of my choice, showing sympathy for her in the best way I could, but I refused to give up hope. If Mia had been kind to me in the past, I might have considered it, but we really didn't get along from the start. Our parents always tried to pit us against each other, and despite my efforts to get along with her, she always thought she was superior to me. It's unclear why she felt that way, but she believed she was better than me. Moreover, our parents treated her as if she were superior to anyone else, further reinforcing her mistaken confidence. I was frustrated, but there was nothing I could do. In my childhood, I often argued with my parents about this issue, but they always emphasized that I was older than her and felt I had to accept reality without jealousy. Therefore, occasionally I confided in my mother's brother, my uncle, because we had a very close relationship. That was the only thing I could do. When my parents asked if I was willing to agree to the terms, I refused. In response, my parents said if I didn't agree, they had no choice but to break their promise and not pay for my college. I was not willing to compromise for my sister's happiness. At that point, I became extremely angry, and it turned into a big fight that day. My parents' actions were very unfair in many ways, and they had been giving me false hopes for many years. Therefore, I wasn't even motivated to look for a job or internship to increase my income, and I told no one about the student loans. I understood that attending college while earning tuition would be extremely difficult. I was placed in a very difficult situation. My parents were too focused on pursuing their own interests, neglecting my situation, and only caring about Mia. Arguing with my parents was futile. I pleaded with my parents and asked them many times, but they were not convinced. My parents stuck to their position, and believed that me dropping out of California Institute of Technology was an action prioritizing my sister's happiness. I opposed this and argued with my parents that what they were asking of me was not a minor sacrifice but giving up my future, which was unbearable to me. However, my parents did not budge. I spoke to my parents and realized it was a waste of time trying to convince them since they had made their priorities clear from the start. It was a mistake to trust my parents. As a result, I packed my clothes and books and left home that night. My parents did not stop me. That evening, I went to my uncle's house and told him everything that happened. Because I have always been close to my uncle, and he was always compassionate. My uncle repeatedly tried to make my mother and sister understand the situation I was facing and see things from my perspective, but he was not successful. However, that was the last straw for me. Eventually, I pleaded with my uncle to support me in any way he could, as I could no longer live with my parents, and asked him to somehow support my sister as well. I requested to be a co-signer for the loan and planned how I would repay the debt later, but all I actually needed was that support. When I arrived at my uncle's house, I was in a state of extreme anxiety, but my uncle reassured me and gave me a chance to talk about my situation. Afterward, he told me to be at ease, because he would pay the tuition. When I heard that my uncle would take on all the responsibility, I was filled with immense gratitude. This meant I would be freed from student loans and other financial concerns. My uncle kept his promise, and he covered all expenses so I could attend college and secure a job as planned after graduation. My uncle, who earns a good income as a doctor, chose to invest in my education rather than use his savings for his future, a true testament to his generosity. I am forever grateful to him. Throughout my first year in college, I had no contact with my parents. They didn't try to reach out either, but since I continued posting on social media, they must have been aware of how I was doing. Although I had blocked them, I still had contact with other relatives, and I know some of them continued speaking with my parents. When my uncle learned about what my parents had done to me, he immediately cut ties with them. Since I didn't expect any contact from my parents, I was shocked when, just last week, they decided to visit me at college, showing up unexpectedly. At first, I considered avoiding them, but curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to meet them. We went out for lunch together. After the meal, my parents apologized for their past actions and expressed a desire to mend our relationship. Though I remained skeptical, I decided to give them another chance. At that time, they hadn't brought Mia along, and when I asked about her, they explained that she had chosen to participate in community activities and planned to reapply to college next year. During the conversation about Mia, they openly expressed their dissatisfaction with her, calling her a disappointment and depicting her as a failure in an attempt to justify their actions toward me. I remained suspicious throughout the entire exchange. Toward the end of the visit, they revealed an additional motive for reaching out to me, stating that since I seemed to be enjoying my time, they decided to bring up something. They explained that they were negotiating a deal with a prominent investor and were deeply involved in discussions with him. My parents had recently joined the board of directors, as the catering service they ran sought to enter the luxury market, and this businessman, through his connections in event management, was the perfect partner to increase revenue by expanding elite-level events. They had multiple discussions with him, and while still figuring out a solution to his proposal, they needed my help. Apparently, a few days before our meeting, he had mentioned that his son was about to enroll at Caltech. And my parents, proud that I attended Caltech, now wanted to introduce me at a business-related party to meet his son and offer any advice or guidance he might need. They agreed to this but found themselves in a tough spot. In truth, my relationship with my parents had been strained, and their real reason for visiting me was to attempt a reconciliation so they could invite me to the upcoming party. They felt this would advance their deal with the investor. Additionally, they hoped that I'd speak positively about them in public, enhancing their social image. Some may wonder what benefit I would gain from attending this party. I thought the same. My parents were aware that I had first turned to my uncle for help, and if I agreed to assist them, they offered to pay me more than double the amount I needed. Thus, I agreed to attend the party under the condition that I speak favorably about their investor appeal, receiving twice the amount offered as compensation. For my parents, this was not an unacceptable offer, so I agreed, though my true intentions were entirely different. 3 days ago, I attended the party with my parents, and upon arrival, I followed the plan as agreed. After I was introduced by my parents, having promised to fulfill everything they had asked of me, I took action to ensure they understood how I felt about them. I decided to be as honest as possible, explaining the entire situation to the investor. I began by expressing gratitude for reconciling with my parents. As he looked confused, I went into further detail. After a year of no contact with me, my parents reached out solely to gain his investment, aiming to make him part of the deal, and strictly speaking, I had to thank him for everything. I also shared how my parents, after 4 years of promising to pay for my college tuition, ultimately backed out of their commitment. This happened because my sister hadn't been accepted into her desired university, and to avoid burdening her, they expected me to bear the financial responsibility. I gave up my dream to protect her feelings. And because I felt I had made the right choice, my parents distanced me from their lives. Those around, including the investor, were stunned by my story. After that, there was little left for me to do, so I called a taxi and returned to college, a mere 45 minutes away. Meanwhile, my parents continued trying to reach out, creating numerous social media accounts and changing contact details to approach me, but it was all very hectic. After I blocked their initial attempts, they accused me of breaking the agreement. Upon hearing my remarks at the party, the investor stopped responding to my parents, which caused me no trouble at all. The only reason I am here now is due to my uncle's advice. I wanted to discuss the recent events, hoping to make him laugh, as I had finally achieved some form of retribution for what my parents had done to me a year ago. However, my uncle did not find my actions amusing. People often see my behavior as vengeful and mean-spirited, but my uncle expressed that I shouldn't have done anything and conveyed my lack of willingness to support my parents. Since then, each conversation with him feels increasingly distant, which troubles me greatly. Later, I apologized to my parents for mistakenly conveying my work schedule and agreed to help with their business. A week after the party, driven by emotion, I reached out to my uncle, asking to speak face-to-face. He agreed, so I visited his house yesterday. Having barely spoken for about a week, there was a slightly awkward atmosphere. The situation was tense when I arrived, but as the conversation progressed, I felt reassured, realizing I didn't need to feel guilty or apologize to my parents. My uncle is someone who respects my opinions. I confided in him that although my parents had promised support for 4 years, they ultimately abandoned me, choosing to protect my sister instead. If they had faced financial issues or another reason preventing them from paying my tuition, I might not have been so angry. However, they expected me to sacrifice my dreams for my sister, and when I refused, they grew angry with me. This fact deeply hurt me. Although my uncle already knew the situation, I hoped that by having an emotional discussion, he could better understand how hurt I was. I also shared how I had always strived to make my parents proud, yet constantly felt treated as secondary. However, it seems that was not enough. I felt a strong anger towards my parents. On the day of the party, I decided that I would make my parents understand that their actions were wrong and, if necessary, I could deceive them with confidence. I was not going to accept being belittled. Upon hearing my story, my uncle simply said that if I truly believed I was right, he should not say anything. I didn't think my conversation with my uncle was that significant, but I was surprised by his reaction. I thought that by explaining my feelings, my uncle would understand that my actions were driven by anger. It may not have been the right thing to do, but if it made me feel better, my uncle should have left me alone. I am not a perfect saint. Always taking the right actions and being used by others is something I cannot accept. It was despicable for my parents to make me accept that foolish little deal and pretend as if I was supporting them for money. Therefore, I told my uncle that he could ignore me if he wanted, but it meant that I would not receive any financial support from him. This was a bold statement for me, as I had no other means and could not foresee the outcome if this issue was not resolved. However, my uncle softened his attitude and stated that there was no need for me to be upset with him. He simply expressed disappointment that I had chosen revenge instead of letting go of the past. Afterward, my uncle patiently explained that revenge is never a means to improve one's life, and I agreed with him. I recognized that my actions were probably not right and not even ethical, and I told my uncle that I had no other choice. After the matter was over, I told myself never to look back, but I could not judge whether it was right or not. However, at least I was able to resolve the disagreement and clear up any misunderstandings. As I left, we both took the situation lightly with a smile, and now I feel that everything is going smoothly. My parents still seem worried and are trying to contact me, but I am ignoring their attempts. 10 days after the party, my parents sent me a text message, but it only irritated me. Tonight, my parents are at my university again. When I refused to meet them at the reception, they said they would not leave until I came down to talk. So I left my room and went to meet my parents. Fearing being embarrassed on campus, I decided to meet them at a nearby cafeteria. Mia was already there when I arrived. What surprised me was that Mia, whom I thought had done nothing last year, clearly had been working out at the gym, and her physique had changed significantly in just 1 year. We used to have nearly the same physique, but now she looked like a model, and she was giving me a provocative look while flaunting her new appearance. Her being there just to intimidate me was partly amusing and partly terrifying. I felt as if she had violent intentions, but fortunately, nothing of the sort happened. My parents had come only to discuss my behavior at the party, but they claimed that everything I had said was utterly pointless. They demanded that I retract what I had made public and post a statement on social media declaring that everything was a fabrication of mine to protect their reputation. After being banned from the investors' events following the party, my parents demanded that I publicly explain the situation. I clearly refused. The reason was that my parents themselves knew what I had discussed with the investor. They tried to bribe me by offering to write a check for any amount I asked, but I firmly refused, telling them that money could not buy my agreement or actions. As I was about to leave, my father became angry, slammed his fist on the table where we were sitting, and insisted that I should not leave until this matter was resolved. The restaurant was located away from other diners, and since I personally knew the owner, she did not kick us out. It was clear that something was happening. I was starting to find it difficult to keep my cool, and knowing that the owner would call the police immediately if Mia tried any violent actions helped me not to be afraid of her. Then I confronted my parents and told my father that he no longer had any right to order me around. I left home when my father refused to pay for my college tuition. I am now an adult with no need to rely on my parents, and their rules no longer apply to me. During our interaction, my mother claimed, "We raised you, and this is how you repay us," but I immediately denied it. I emphasized to them that what they did for me was their obligation, and I was never treated specially like Mia. My parents always showed biased affection towards her, and I felt it was lacking for me. I always felt alienated because my parents' attention was always directed towards my sister. After the conversation, my parents could not argue back, and I warned them that if they tried anything unfair, I would call the police and obtain restraining orders against each of them. After that, I left the place. I am now back in my dorm room and talked to my uncle on the phone about today's events. I was convinced that my parents were using Mia to threaten me, and I shared these suspicions with my uncle. I may be overreacting, but I am not willing to take any risks. Therefore, I told my uncle that I no longer felt comfortable with my parents and wanted to apply for a restraining order. My uncle was satisfied with my decision and advised me to contact a lawyer immediately. Filled with doubts, I decided to apply for a restraining order that day, and coincidentally, Mia appeared at my university, demanding to meet again. I chose to meet her in a public place because if she did anything suspicious, it would be captured on camera. She insisted that I should apologize to our parents because they were very angry about my actions. I firmly refused. She emphasized that an apology was necessary and threatened that if I did not, I would be punished. I inadvertently replied that I was not afraid of people like my parents. At that moment, she made a move towards me. Fortunately, the entire incident was recorded on surveillance cameras, which will undoubtedly help when I obtain the restraining order. Instead of hitting my face, she grabbed my cheek forcefully. It was very painful, but this incident has made it easier to obtain a restraining order, for which I am grateful. 3 months after applying, the court recognized my claim and issued restraining orders against my parents and Mia. The fact that Mia's violent actions were recorded on surveillance cameras served as decisive evidence in court. Throughout this difficult time, my uncle has been a steadfast pillar of support, and his introduction to a reliable, excellent lawyer was a great help. My academic performance remains very strong, particularly in the field of data science, where my achievements are increasingly recognized. As the end of my sophomore year approached, I was fortunate to receive an offer for a summer internship from a leading technology company. Unexpectedly, I received shocking news when a relative on my mother's side suddenly contacted me to inform me that my grandfather, whom I had been close to since childhood, was seriously ill and hospitalized. His last wish was for reconciliation among the family members. After discussing with my uncle following years of family conflict, I ultimately decided to visit my grandfather. My parents and Mia were also present in the hospital room, but they avoided speaking directly to me due to the restraining orders. My grandfather held my hand and, with his last strength, assured me firmly, "Your choices were not wrong." Furthermore, he advised my parents and Mia that since each of us walks a different path, we should respect each other's choices. A week after he imparted these final words, my grandfather passed away. His words resonated within each of us, embedded deeply despite the profound sadness that enveloped our family. At the funeral, we did not exchange direct words, but the hostility I had once felt had already receded. Half a year has passed, and I continue to focus on my studies. My sister Mia has started a new life at a local university, while my parents are fully committed to rebuilding their business. My uncle often says, "Time resolves many issues, but for now, I am not actively seeking to mend my relationship with my parents or Mia." However, the intense anger and hatred I once felt have now dissipated from my heart. Currently, I am dedicated to advancing my career development, aiming to establish myself as a specialist in the field of data science. Occasionally, I remember the warm words left by my grandfather and quietly hope for a true reconciliation with my family someday. Sometimes I open the family album and look at old photos. These photos bring a sense of nostalgia and a certain melancholy, but no longer the sharp pain of the past. This can be considered part of the growth and change in life's journey. My uncle continues to be a pillar of support for me. His constant support enables me to face challenges and lead a positive life. Starting next month, I plan to cover part of my tuition with my part-time job earnings, marking an important step toward independence. Thus, my life is entering a new chapter, accepting the past while walking my own path with a firm resolve, never forgetting it.